There is a moment in every warrior's life, a moment when the mind begins to tremble before the body does, when fear whispers louder than intuition, when ego claws for control, and silence feels like a storm. Most people break in this moment, but the samurai did not, because the samurai did not wait for fear to disappear. He learned to walk into it with stillness in his steps and presence carved into his breath. This is a story about such a man, a young warrior named Riku, born with strength in his hands but unrest in his mind, a man whose sword was sharp but whose spirit shook like winter bamboo in the wind. One night, after losing control in battle, Riku sought out the last surviving master of an ancient mental discipline system, a retired swordsman known only as Shoma, a monk warrior whose silence carried more weight than any blade. Shoma promised Riku nothing, no shortcuts, no glory, no power, only a path that required him to confront the storms inside his own skull, to master the trembling breath, to face the shadows of ego, and to discover the unshakable control that comes not from force, but from presence. This is the parable of how a warrior learned to command the only battlefield that truly exists, the mind. Chapter 1. The Storm Within the Warrior. Part 1. Riku trudged through the ash-strewn fields, the evening wind carrying the scent of scorched earth and sweat. The battle was won, yet victory tasted like iron in his mouth. Around him, the village murmured in quiet relief, but no cheer reached his ears. His hands trembled, not from fatigue, but from the unbidden memory of that moment. The second when instinct faltered, when his blade wavered and panic threatened to consume him. He had fought with skill, yet somewhere in the chaos, his mind had betrayed him. The elders, seated beneath the torii gates, offered him gestures of comfort, their voices heavy with concern and caution. "Rest, young warrior," they urged. "Tomorrow, the world will look different." But Riku could not rest. Sleep, he realized, would not erase the tremor in his chest, nor the echo of fear in his mind. Victory without control was hollow. He knew brute strength could fell armies, but it could not still the storm inside. Night fell, blanketing the village in ink-dark silence. Riku returned to his quarters and sank onto the floor, the wooden boards cold beneath him. He closed his eyes, but images would not stop. They replayed the second when his breath caught, when his vision narrowed and thoughts scattered like wind-blown leaves. His heart raced as he saw himself frozen, his sword clattering as fear surged, and the enemy closing in. Shame and anger wrestled in him. Shame for failing, anger at himself for weakness. Desperation, sharp and unrelenting, drove him beyond the village. Word had reached him of a solitary master, a man who had devoted decades to the study of the mind, a warrior monk named Shoma. He was said to dwell among the northern mountains, where snow kissed the cliffs and silence was a living presence. They called him a recluse, a shadow among stones, whose mastery over self surpassed the mightiest swordsmen of legend. If Riku was to confront the weakness in his own spirit, he would have to seek this man. The journey was treacherous, nights were bitter, and the paths narrow and jagged. Cutting into his resolve as much as his body, he climbed over frost-crusted rocks, his breath clouding before him, a mirror to the storm in his mind. Yet every step forward, every aching muscle, reminded him that a warrior's true battlefield was not the field of combat, but the mind that trembles in its own chaos. At last, he found Shoma's dwelling, a small wooden hut clinging to the edge of the mountainside, smoke curling lazily from its chimney. The master appeared, a figure at once frail and unyielding, eyes sharp as obsidian and calm as winter lakes. Riku approached, his voice a whisper of reverence and doubt. Shoma regarded him silently, measuring the weight of his fear, the tremor of his presence. Then, slowly, he spoke. Your enemy was not the blade in front of you. It was the one inside your mind. Riku did not yet understand the depth of the words. He only felt the vastness of what lay ahead, a journey not of steel and fire, but of stillness, discipline, and the unrelenting confrontation of self. The storm within the warrior had only begun to roar. Chapter 1, Part 2. Riku's first night in Shoma's presence was heavier than any battlefield. Silence dominated the hut, pressing against his ears, filling the corners of the room with weight he could almost touch. Outside, the wind clawed at the mountain, rattling the wooden walls. Yet inside, the quiet was absolute, unbroken, unyielding. It was not empty. It was alive, and Riku felt every heartbeat of it in his chest. Shoma offered no words of encouragement, no promises of power, no praise for his victories. Instead, the master moved with deliberate precision, preparing tea, stacking firewood, adjusting the tatami mats with a calm that made the young warrior restless. Riku's hands itched for movement, for action. But Shoma never asked him to strike, to fight, or even to speak. Hours passed. Riku's mind refused to obey the stillness. Thoughts ricocheted through him. Failures, regrets, imagined criticisms, fleeting flashes of past battles where he had lost control. His heart thumped unevenly as adrenaline mingled with shame. He felt cornered by his own consciousness. The mind, a warring general who had declared mutiny. Shoma finally spoke, his voice cutting through the storm like a blade of clarity. You seek control over the world, yet you cannot govern yourself. Your mind quivers because you have never faced it. You have never stood still while the tempest roars inside you. Riku's chest tightened. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, to explain that he had fought bravely. But even in his ego-fueled pride, he recognized the truth. Strength without discipline was a fragile sword. Victory without mastery over self was hollow. Shoma gestured toward the floor, the gesture simple, almost imperceptible. Sit, breathe, watch. Riku obeyed, and for the first time, he became an observer of his own storm. Every inhalation trembled. Every exhalation carried the residue of panic. Thoughts came and went, projections of fear and desire. He had never scrutinized before. He felt exposed, naked before his own mind. The hours stretched into dawn, and Riku began to notice subtle patterns. The way fear rose predictably when expectation pressed too hard. The way the mind's narratives looped endlessly, trapping him in imagined defeat. He realized that strength had always been external. Muscles, swords, shields. But presence was internal. It required patience, awareness, and the courage to witness the mind without flinching. By sunrise, a strange calm settled over him. Not a triumph, not relief, but a quiet acknowledgement. He had begun to see himself. He had begun to map the battlefield that mattered most. Shoma observed him silently, and after a long pause, he said simply, "The first battle has begun. You will fight not with your sword, but with your breath, your attention, your presence. Only then will the mind stop trembling." Riku understood then that the path ahead was not a training ground for victory over others. It was a crucible for victory over himself. The storm within was not a weakness to be banished. It was a signal, a teacher, a mirror, and the first lesson of the warrior's mind was clear. Control begins where the storm begins, not where it ends. Tomorrow, the journey into stillness and discipline would begin. And so, under the watchful gaze of Shoma, Riku would learn that mastery of the mind begins with the courage to stand still while the storm rages inside. Chapter 2: The Discipline of Stillness. Part 1. Dawn crept across the mountainside in thin slivers of amber light, cutting through the mist like the edge of a sword. Riku awoke on the tatami mat, muscles aching, lungs tight with the memory of the night's inner battle. The storm inside him had quieted only slightly, but he carried with him a new awareness. The mind, untamed, was a far more dangerous opponent than any human enemy. Shoma did not speak. He only gestured for Riku to follow outside. The snow-crusted ground crunched beneath their sandals as they walked toward a clearing overlooking the valley. The wind, biting and sharp, seemed alive, as though it tested Riku's resolve. Shoma motioned toward the ground and seated himself with deliberate care. Cross-legged, hands resting lightly on his knees, he stared at the horizon, eyes half closed, and breathed in measured, audible rhythm. Riku mimicked him. At first, his breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. Thoughts bombarded him, the fear of inadequacy, the shame of his past failures, the yearning for recognition. His body itched for action. Any movement to break the unbearable stillness. Shoma watched silently, a shadow against the rising sun, and finally spoke. "Stillness is the blade sharper than any sword. Discipline is the hand that guides it. Sit and see the currents of your own mind." Hours passed, or perhaps only moments. Time lost meaning in the grip of the exercise. Riku's muscles cramped, his knees burned. But slowly, the frenetic chatter inside began to separate into patterns. He noticed the way fear rose predictably, how thoughts looped like wind caught in a canyon, how ego's voice tried to dictate judgment and action. Each inhalation became a marker, each exhalation a map of his internal terrain. Shoma introduced the principle of observational attention, an ancient method blending Zen focus and psychological insight. The mind is like water, still it reflects the world clearly. Turbulent, it distorts everything. Riku's ego balked, demanding movement, daring him to rebel against the monotony. But Shoma's gaze, unwavering and calm, reminded him, strength is born in the quiet. The body without the mind is motion without direction. By mid-afternoon, Riku noticed subtle shifts. Panic no longer surged like a tidal wave. Thoughts appeared and vanished without dragging him into their chaos. He glimpsed a small, steady calm beneath the storm, a presence he had never known. It was fragile, but it existed. And with Shoma's guidance, he began to understand the first truth of the warrior's discipline. Mastery of the mind begins with the courage to sit, breathe, and observe. The mountains remained indifferent, yet in their quiet, Riku discovered a reflection of his own mind, jagged, unpredictable, but capable of stillness when trained. The first taste of control came not from effort, but from surrender. Surrender to observation, surrender to awareness, surrender to presence. Shoma finally broke the silence. A sword is useless in the hands of a mind that trembles. You cannot master the world until you master yourself. The lesson was brutal in its simplicity. Strength was no longer external. It was measured in patience, in attention, in the relentless practice of seeing oneself without flinching. Riku inhaled deeply, letting the cold air fill his lungs. For the first time, he realized that stillness was not weakness. It was preparation. It was weaponry. It was the birth of presence. The young warrior had begun to touch the edge of true mastery, yet the path of stillness demanded more than observation. It demanded surrender, patience, and confrontation with fear itself. Chapter 2, Part 2. Night descended over the mountains like a velvet curtain. The stars distant and cold above Riku and Shoma. The day's training had left his body stiff, yet his mind buzzed with the subtle tremors of discovery. Stillness, he realized, was not simply the absence of movement. It was an active confrontation with the torrent of thought, a silent wrestling match with every impulse, every shadow of fear that rose unbidden. Shoma instructed Riku to kneel by the frozen river that ran below the hut. The water, moving beneath ice and snow, mirrored the paradox he now faced. Constant motion concealed beneath apparent stillness. Observe, Shoma said. The mind is the same. You see turbulence on the surface, yet beneath it lies your true current. Do not fight what rises. Watch it, understand it, and it loses its power. Riku's knees burned, and his back ached, but he obeyed. Each thought that sprang into his mind, a memory of shame, a flicker of doubt, a whisper of anger, was acknowledged, then allowed to pass. He felt the body's natural urge to flee, to move, to act, but he resisted. With every breath, the river's rhythm seemed to seep into him. The cold teaching patience, the flow teaching surrender. For the first time, Riku noticed the biological truth Shoma had hinted at. Fear triggers the amygdala, a primal storm within the brain. Left unchecked, it hijacks the body, creating panic, hesitation, even paralysis. Yet, when observed calmly, with mindful breathing, the storm lost its claws and reason returned. His pulse slowed, his shoulders dropped, the mind's grip weakened. He understood, scientifically and intuitively, that discipline of attention could bend the body's primal responses without violence. The evening deepened. Shoma spoke rarely, offering only guiding words, like a bell echoing in a canyon. Do not seek to silence the mind, young one. Observe it. Be the still point around which it spins. That is where power begins. Hours became meditative cycles, breaths in, breaths out. The snow whispered as it settled on the mountains. The river murmured beneath ice, and Riku, kneeling on the frozen earth, felt the first seeds of unshakable presence take root. He no longer chased mastery with his hands or eyes. He observed it quietly, internally, feeling the subtle strength in the very act of surrendering control. By night's end, his body ached. His mind still wrestled occasionally, yet something had shifted. Riku glimpsed the truth. that had eluded him on the battlefield. Victory without mental discipline is hollow. Brute strength can defeat an opponent, but it cannot quiet fear, tame the ego, or calm the storm that rages inside. Presence is the only weapon capable of transforming weakness into unshakable control. Shoma finally stood, brushing snow from his robes. He placed a hand lightly on Riku's shoulder and whispered, "The storm is no longer outside you now. We turn toward the fear itself. Only by walking into it will you learn to command it." The next trial awaited, one that would force Riku to confront fear, not in the mind alone, but in every breath, every step, and every heartbeat. The path of stillness had revealed the edge of mastery. Now, he would be tested by the storm itself. Chapter 3. Walking into Fear. Part 1. The forest at night was alive with whispers. Shadows stretched between towering trees, bending and twisting in the flickering light of the moon. Riku followed Shoma along a narrow, uneven path, each step threatening to unbalance him. His body was alert, muscles coiled, senses stretched beyond comfort. The master moved silently, a ghost among the trees, his presence steady, unshakable. Shoma stopped and placed a hand gently on Riku's shoulder. "Tonight, you will walk without sight," he said, "blindfolded. Trust only your breath, your senses, your presence. Fear will rise. Let it. Do not flee. Do not resist. Observe it. Enter it." Riku's heart thundered. Blindness magnified everything. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves became a threat. His mind screamed, warning of invisible predators, of hidden traps, of failure. Panic rose like a tidal wave, threatening to drown him in seconds. He wanted to tear the blindfold from his eyes, to run back to the safety of Shoma's hut. But a deeper, disciplined part of him, nurtured through hours of stillness, reminded him to breathe. The first steps were tentative, awkward. Riku felt roots and stones underfoot, imagined pitfalls that did not exist. His ego demanded control. The mind demanded retreat. Yet Shoma's voice, calm and unwavering, cut through the storm. "Fear is not your enemy. It is a messenger. Walk beside it, and it loses its teeth." With each cautious step, Riku began to sense patterns. The rhythm of the forest, the subtle shifts of wind, the faint echo of his own breath returning to a steady cadence. Fear remained, but it no longer surged like a tidal wave. It became a presence to be acknowledged, a force to be studied, not destroyed. His mind, trained in stillness, began to separate signal from noise. He noticed when thoughts of failure arose, when adrenaline surged, when the body prepared to flee. Observation replaced reaction. Shoma guided him deeper into the forest, steps slow and deliberate. Each moment of terror became a lesson. Riku realized that the physiological response to fear, the racing heart, the tightening chest, the surge of energy, is neutral. Only interpretation gives it power. He began experimenting with his breath, expanding exhalations, lengthening inhalations, sensing the nervous system recalibrate in real time. It was science and philosophy intertwined. Zen mindfulness meeting the neurological truth of fear management. Hours passed, though time was lost in the flow of concentrated awareness. Riku's steps became surer. Each movement reflected the lessons of stillness. The mind was no longer his captor. Fear still rose, a shadow across his consciousness. But now, he walked beside it, steady, observing, aware. The forest, once a realm of unknown threats, became a teacher. At last, Shoma halted. Moonlight glinted through the trees, illuminating the young warrior's face. His breath was measured, heart steady, presence palpable. Shoma's eyes softened, a rare acknowledgement of progress. Control is not killing fear, he said. It is walking beside it. Riku, for the first time, felt the stirrings of transformation. A fear faced and understood, rather than suppressed or ignored. The forest had taught him a truth no battle could. Mastery over fear is mastery over self. Yet the journey was far from complete. The young warrior would soon confront the deeper shadows of his mind. The ego that whispered, deceived, and demanded control, threatening to undo all he had learned. Chapter 3. Part 2. Shoma led Riku to a small clearing where the moonlight pooled like silver water on the forest floor. Here the blindfold remained, but the environment shifted. The trees closer, the underbrush denser, the sounds sharper, more unpredictable. Each step became a negotiation with the unknown, a test of awareness and calm. The master spoke only once. Fear will strike hardest when you expect it least. Let it rise. Do not run. Do not fight. Observe it, and it will teach you. Riku's first misstep sent his foot sliding on damp leaves. The sudden imbalance sparked adrenaline, panic clawing at the edges of his consciousness. He froze, muscles rigid, mind racing through worst-case scenarios. Then he remembered the lessons of stillness, the breath, the observation, the quiet acceptance. Slowly, deliberately, he adjusted his posture, shifted his weight, and exhaled the tension. Fear did not disappear, but it no longer dictated his movement. He began to notice patterns in his own physiological responses. His heartbeat quickened in anticipation, the chest tightening, muscles tensing, yet controlled breathing, rooted stance, and mindful attention allowed him to modulate these responses in real time. Every step became a meditation, every misstep a lesson. Fear was no longer an enemy. It was data, a signal that sharpened awareness. Hours stretched onward, the forest's nocturnal sounds, the snap of twigs, the whisper of wind, the distant call of an owl were no longer chaos, but cues, each one integrated into his sensory map. Riku learned to trust his intuition, honed not by raw instinct alone, but by the clarity of focused presence. His ego, that restless whisperer demanding control and immediate action, began to fade beneath the weight of awareness. Finally, Shoma spoke again, stepping beside him. A warrior is not the one who kills fear. He is the one who walks with it, unmoved. Riku removed the blindfold. The forest, once a labyrinth of terror, now appeared serene. Shadows no longer leapt at him. The unknown was no longer threatening. He saw the interconnectedness of movement, breath, and mind, the subtle harmony of observation and action. This was more than survival. It was mastery, a tangible sense of control that transcended the physical body. In that moment, Riku understood a deeper truth. Fear will always exist, but it is the mind's interpretation, not the event itself, that dictates suffering. He had walked into the storm and remained unmoved. His presence had become a shield. Shoma's gaze softened with rare approval. Tonight, you have touched the edge of control, but your greatest adversary remains. The self inflated with ego, the inner voice that convinces you of false threats and false victories. Prepare, for the trial of silence will test what you believe you know about strength. Riku felt the weight of what lay ahead, yet for the first time, he did not tremble. Fear had been confronted, understood, and integrated. Now, the discipline of presence would be applied to the subtler, more insidious battlefield within. The ego itself, the next stage, demanded deeper surrender. Riku would face the shadows of his own pride, arrogance, and unexamined thoughts. The trial of silence, where true mastery would be forged from humility and inner observation. Chapter 4. The Ego's Trial by Silence. Part 1. The dawn arrived over the mountains with a quiet gravity, the kind that seemed to hold the world in still suspension. Riku knelt on the frosted tatami mats, the remnants of the forest's lessons heavy within him. The storm of fear had been faced, examined, and subdued, but another, more insidious adversary awaited: the ego. It was a shadow that had always whispered beneath triumph and failure alike, magnifying doubt, inflating pride, and disguising illusion as reality. Shoma approached with deliberate care, a presence as unyielding as the mountains themselves. Tonight, you will speak nothing. You will react to nothing. You will allow yourself to exist as witness only, he instructed. This is the path of silence, the crucible in which the ego is revealed and dissolved. Riku's first hours were torture. His mind, so recently disciplined to still fear, rebelled with 1,000 voices. Thoughts clamored for acknowledgement, whispers of past victories and imagined slights weaving into a relentless symphony. Every instinct demanded expression, action, explanation. Every unspoken word was a challenge to his sense of control. Yet, Shoma's eyes, serene and unwavering, reminded him that the path was not broken by discomfort. Silence was not absence. It was presence, magnified, a mirror reflecting every hidden impulse. Riku felt the ego stirring like a caged predator, the desire for recognition, the fear of insignificance, the yearning to justify past failures. He realized that these shadows had governed his life far longer than he had known. Hours blurred into days. Time was measured only by the rhythm of breath and the subtle shifts of the body. The hunger to speak, to react, to assert was constant. Memories rose like ghosts, moments where he had lashed out in pride, times he had hidden behind anger, all the fleeting victories inflated by self-deception. In the solitude of the mountains, with only the wind as companion, he faced the architecture of his own mind. Riku began to notice patterns. Every imagined threat was a product of ego. Every surge of self-importance was a distraction from true presence. Shoma had once said, "Ego builds walls, silence collapses them." Now, kneeling in the cold, Riku understood, by refusing the compulsion to react, by observing rather than asserting, he was dismantling the architecture of false selfhood. The physical challenge was nothing compared to the mental strain. Days without speech, without feedback, without validation, stripped him bare. Yet in this deprivation, clarity began to emerge. He observed without judgment. He listened without expectation. The inner voice, once roaring with authority, softened, diminished. where pride and fear had once dictated his responses. A still, quiet awareness began to take root. By nightfall, a subtle transformation had occurred. Riku's muscles ached. His mind remained vigilant, yet he sensed a calm deeper than any he had experienced in battle. Silence had become a teacher, ego, a student to his awareness. He understood, in fragments, that humility was not weakness, it was clarity. The path of silence would continue to strip him bare, confronting the hidden narratives and unexamined desires that fueled the ego until Riku could emerge grounded, sharp, and ready to wield presence as the ultimate weapon. Chapter 4, Part 2. The second day of silence pressed down on Riku like a physical weight. The forest outside Shoma's hut was indifferent, its wind whispering secrets he could neither speak nor respond to. Every instinct screamed for interaction, to comment, to justify, to assert. His mind, once disciplined in stillness and fear, now confronted a far more subtle adversary. The voice within that demanded recognition, that equated action with worth, that spun stories of past failures and imagined slights. Shoma observed him from a distance, a living embodiment of quiet mastery. His presence alone was a reminder that ego was never to be annihilated, only understood and restrained. The mind inflates what it fears and magnifies what it desires. The master said softly, as if to the wind, "You must learn to witness without feeding either." Riku's body trembled, not from fatigue, but from the mental strain of holding nothing, saying nothing. Every time a thought of pride or anger surfaced, he labeled it, acknowledged it, and let it pass. The process was excruciating, a slow dismantling of self-concepts he had clung to for years. The warrior, who had feared panic, now feared the subtle manipulation of ego even more. Yet he pressed on, kneeling on cold tatami, focusing on breath, observing every rising impulse as if it were a leaf drifting on a stream. By midday, the first cracks in his old self began to appear. Memories that once triggered resentment or egoic pride now surfaced, but their hold weakened. The ritual of silence revealed the patterns of thought, the triggers of false confidence, and the illusions of control. Riku realized that the true battlefield was no longer external. He had confronted armies, storms, and fear, but internal, where every decision, reaction, and desire could strengthen or weaken him. Shoma introduced meditative drills to deepen the effect. Prolonged seated observation, walking in absolute stillness, and controlled breathing, timed with heartbeat awareness. Riku's mind, once a torrent of egoic impulses, began to settle into intervals of clarity. Each breath became a tool to recalibrate attention, each silent moment a mirror reflecting the true nature of thought and self. The body, trained through hardship, had become a vessel for discipline. Now, the mind was beginning the same transformation. By nightfall, a profound calm enveloped him. Ego had not disappeared, but it no longer commanded him. Humility had emerged, not as submission, but as insight. Riku felt a strength that did not need assertion, a presence that did not demand recognition. He was grounded, aware, and ready for the next stage of mastery. Shoma, standing in the moonlight, regarded him with quiet satisfaction. "You have begun to see yourself as you truly are," he said. "Strength without ego, presence without distraction. Tomorrow, we test your mind in the chaos of action, where all you have learned will be forged into immovable mastery. Riku had faced fear, silence, and ego, and emerged tempered, aware, and grounded. Now awaited the ultimate test, the dawn duel, where unshakable presence would be measured against unpredictable chaos, and mastery would be proven not in theory, but in movement. Chapter 5. Unshakable Presence, the Final Test. Part 1. The first light of dawn seeped into the mountains like molten gold, spilling across the frozen ground. Riku's breath rose in soft clouds, visible in the cold morning air, each exhale measured, deliberate. Today, the culmination of all he had learned would be tested not by words, not by theory, but by motion and presence. The duel awaited. Shoma led him to a secluded clearing, where the trees formed a natural arena. A figure stood waiting, masked, body poised, muscles coiled like springs. The masked warrior moved with silent confidence, his presence calm but charged, every detail sharp and deliberate. Riku's heart pulsed, but his mind remained still. Fear, ego, and doubt, the storms that had once ruled him, were now observed without interference. Shoma spoke only once. This is not about victory. It is about control. The mind is the battlefield. Your body will follow, but your presence will guide it. The duel began with a sudden burst of movement. The masked opponent struck quickly, attacks unpredictable, testing reflexes and instincts. Riku felt the surge of adrenaline, the familiar whisper of panic, but he anchored himself to breath, posture, and awareness. The lessons of stillness, of walking into fear, of silent observation of ego, all converged in the precise moment. He moved not reactively, but intentionally. Each step, each pivot, each swing was guided by clarity, not emotion. The chaos of combat became a mirror of his own mind. Distractions noted but not obeyed. Impulses acknowledged but restrained. Fear faced and integrated. He felt the ancient state Shoma had described. Fudōshin, the immovable mind, where action flows effortlessly and presence becomes weapon. The masked warrior advanced relentlessly. Riku's blade met his strikes with calm precision. The world seemed to narrow, sound fading, time stretching, leaving only breath, focus, and motion. The duel was not a contest of strength, but of mental command. Each strike he avoided or countered was proof that mastery begins in the mind before manifesting in the body. Moments stretched into an eternal rhythm. Riku recognized patterns in the opponent's movement, subtle ticks, slight shifts in weight. This awareness did not arise from force or aggression, but from the quiet cultivation of attention honed over weeks of stillness, fear, and silence. Ego had no voice here. Pride had no foothold. Only presence ruled. Sweat glistened on his brow, the cold air biting, yet his body remained calm. Guided by disciplined breath, every nerve and muscle obeyed thought without hesitation, each motion precise yet fluid. Riku realized the culmination of Shoma's teachings. Control is not suppression, but harmony. The mind's storms are not eliminated, they are integrated, and in integration, power emerges. Shoma observed silently from the edge of the clearing, eyes narrowing slightly, a rare flicker of approval crossing his face. The duel, though dangerous, was also a crucible, a final test of the transformation forged through fear, stillness, and silence. Riku would soon discover that mastery of presence is not merely surviving chaos, it is moving through it effortlessly, unmoved, unshakable, and complete. Chapter 5. Part 2. The duel reached its peak as the masked warrior intensified his assault. Strikes converging like lightning from every direction, Riku felt the familiar rush, the old panic that once would have seized him. But now, it passed like wind across the mountains, acknowledged and set aside. He was no longer the same warrior who trembled before fear. He was a vessel of presence, a mind tempered by stillness, silence, and confrontation with the ego. Each movement was effortless, yet precise. Riku's breath dictated rhythm. His senses absorbed every nuance, the subtle shift of weight, the faintest twitch of an arm, the sound of breath against the cold air. The world had narrowed to the duel, predator and prey, motion and stillness, action and awareness, fused into a single, unbroken continuum. Fudōshin, the immovable mind, was no longer a concept. It was the landscape of his being, the masked opponent, relentless and unpredictable, could not provoke panic. Nor could he exploit hesitation. Riku's body flowed in harmony with intention, his mind a calm lake, reflecting each assault with clarity and precision. Every strike avoided, every counter executed, was proof of the lessons ingrained through weeks of patient, grueling practice. Fear is a messenger, ego a shadow, stillness a weapon. Then in a final, almost imperceptible motion, Riku disarmed his opponent, blade steady, posture unshaken, heart calm. The mask slipped, revealing a familiar face. One of Shoma's earliest students, a master in his own right. The revelation struck not with surprise, but with clarity. The test was never about defeating another, but about not mastering oneself under pressure. Shoma approached, his robes brushing softly against the snow-laden ground. He placed a hand lightly on Riku's shoulder, eyes meeting his with a rare warmth. "You now wield a weapon rarer than any blade," he said. "Presence. The mind, disciplined and aware, is stronger than any enemy, swifter than any strike, unshakable against the chaos of the world." Riku exhaled slowly, the tension releasing in a long, measured breath. The duel had ended, yet he felt no triumph of victory over another, only the quiet triumph of mastery over self. The storms that once raged inside, fear, doubt, ego, were still present, but they no longer held dominion. They were observed, integrated, and harmonized within the immovable mind he now carried. Shoma stepped back, his gaze sweeping the clearing, the mountains, the rising sun. "Remember this, the warrior who masters his mind becomes unshakable. No enemy can break what silence has already strengthened." Riku knelt, bowed deeply to his master, and then rose with a new understanding. The journey of discipline, fear, stillness, and ego had forged him into a warrior, not of muscle or skill alone, but of mind and spirit. He carried within him a presence that could navigate chaos with calm, face uncertainty with clarity, and move through life unshaken by storms that would have once shattered him. As the sun climbed higher, painting the mountains gold, Riku sheathed his sword, not as a symbol of triumph over another, but as a testament to mastery over the self. The path was not complete. Growth is infinite, but he had touched the essence of the warrior's mind. Unyielding, aware and present, the warrior who masters his mind becomes unshakable, because no enemy can break what silence has already strengthened. If this journey into the warrior's mind resonated with you, take a moment to honor it, like the video, share it with someone who seeks strength, and leave a comment. What part of the warrior's path spoke to you most? And if you want to walk further along the path of discipline, presence, and mastery, make sure to subscribe. The journey doesn't end here. Together, we continue to learn, to grow, and to become unshakable.